Hey, I'm Doc Frank. Welcome to my podcast where every week I'm presenting you authentic, spontaneous, and unrehearsed discussions with interesting guests from the rail industry about topics that matter. Make sure you subscribe and tell your friends about it, as this podcast will both educate and entertain them. Thank you for listening. Today's episode is a highlight reel of 3 conversations I had with different female guests. The first conversation was from episode number 11 with Victoria Winder from Brisbane, previously in London. The first highlight is about her experience in testing and commissioning on brownfield railways on London Underground, arguably one of the most complicated and difficult railway environments underground that you can find in the world. The second highlight was about her first-hand insights of being a part of the Crossrail project team when it turned out that the project would not finish in time but would be substantially delayed. And the third example is her experience from talking to senior management and politicians. Please enjoy the highlights of the interview with Victoria. How was your experience in testing and commissioning on the London Underground environment?
I'd like to see the end and the glory of a project, to see what the blood and tears are worth. So I've always stuck out at the testing and commissioning phase towards the end. And it's just an area it's built and I find most interesting and most rewarding. And with that comes obviously the integration phase. So I was very lucky and stressed to be involved in the Victoria Line resignaling upgrade for the London Underground back in 2008. That was a huge project. That was a key integration project because we had an overlay system. So we had an old legacy system with the new system being installed and the two running concurrently in regards to which rolling stock you were using. So they would have an old rolling stock, a 67 rolling stock retrofitted with some of the new CBTC equipment. And then when they switched on the wayside equipment that was the CBTC, they would change boxes in the car, and then that train would be able to see the new overlay equipment and use that. And just seeing how the technology was being used was really interesting. So that was a real hit and run lesson into integration, because it was all my previous experiences had been relatively greenfield sites, and this was a real brownfield site. So you can imagine London Underground has very little time on the coal front. So our worst nights were barely an hour, and our normal nights, if everything went to plan, you probably would get just under 4 hours or 4 and a bit hours worth of actual site time. So that was very interesting. But yes, that was my introduction into integration in all forms, in a community sense. So there was different parts of the project having to be coordinated to work together, and from a testing sense as well.
How did you feel being a part of the Crossrail project team when it turned out that the project would be significantly delayed?
At the time, it was a very pressure pot environment. Literally, there was, it was such a huge project, the biggest construction project in Europe of its time at the time. Yeah. But for us, it was a clear distinction that towards the end, what was wrong, I think, from my perspective anyway, and I think a few people would agree with me, was that a lot of importance was put on the start of testing rather than looking at the end of testing, because what happened in the end was it was just a blank, right, we're going to start testing regardless of the system's availability. And all that did was actually just drag out the end of testing, and what should have been 10% remaining took 90% of the time towards the end. It dragged everything out, because the minute you start start dynamic testing with the trains, you're chopping off the arm of the construction side that still has all this residual work that they have to complete, but they're unable to do it because you're effectively running a railway at this point, but you still have all this residual work to complete, and you have a workforce basically standing around, retained, waiting to get back on site and complete that work. So the emphasis on starting testing was, perhaps now in hindsight, was just the wrong direction to take on, because the systems just weren't there. The integrity of the system, end-to-end testing, just wasn't sustainable to do for long periods of testing. There was a lot of testing at the beginning that was sort of full-fed. It wasn't a fully automated system. So even the bugs that you were picking up and putting back into the design office to rework through some of the software issues, there wasn't a true representation of the actual work and testing that you were doing, because it wasn't a fully automated railway, you know. So It was frustrating, Doc, to say the least. It was very frustrating, especially because when the train started, it wasn't a scenario where we could just stop. That would have looked like a failure on every part, you know, if the trains weren't sustainable or the system wasn't sustainable. So it was just literally, now you've started, it was just, you have to continue testing on what was a half-baked system at the time. It wasn't at all where it should have been.
How is your experience in talking to high-level managers and politicians?
London Underground, the Victoria Line resignaling, that was, albeit London Underground is a, you know, private, partly privatised business now. That, you know, you had the powers that be pushing down on the pressure, because the amount of access that required was a hindrance to the timetable. So they were closing down the line earlier than expected. So that was, you know, people that wanted to get home later than usual would have to get the rail bus replacement, so that wasn't good for the London mayor. He didn't like to have that on him. I was also part of the HS2 from a business capability point, and having to support the Royal Assent. Again, that was dealing with ministers in the government who, you know, you can say as much as you want, and unfortunately, to try and really explain the issues that you've got, you fall down the technical side, and just no one ever wants to hear that at all. It's so hard to sort of speak in such layman's terms when you're trying to basically justify, you know, for example, Crossrail was at the start of £50 billion railway, and when you try and explain to people the intricacies of what's going wrong, and they want it just very simplified, and you're thinking, it's £15 billion here. How easily do you want me to actually speak this to you in layman's terms? Because it's a lot of equipment. There's a few more stations to talk about, but it's just, unfortunately, the higher up the chain, they just want it in a simplified format, which has always been something that, it's something that's always baffled me, because I just think surely you'd want to know the crux of it, but they're just not interested in the nitty detail of it, in the weeds, shall we say. One of the first contributions from senior management is to increase resources. So, you know, I'll quite often say, don't give me 9 women to have a baby in a month, because it just doesn't work that way. Or you can't mark your own homework. So this testing has to happen at the level and sequence that is currently being planned out, because that is the integrity and the process that governs this whole piece together. The assurance community are expecting to see that evidence be packaged up in this way, and you can't mark your own homework. You can't have Bill or Sandy, you know, go from design and just keep going forward with installing it, testing it, and then assuring it. You just can't do that. It would never work. And thankfully, you know, a lot of people just champion that process anyway, and are very steadfast to make sure that it doesn't get infiltrated with shortcuts or, shortfalls in that sense. So that's why, people's mental health is so important, because, people under pressure are often the ones that make mistakes, isn't it?
Hi, it's Doc Frank. Really quick. If you are a fan of communications-based train control, or short CBTC, there's an event coming up in September that you absolutely don't want to miss. It's the first virtual global CBTC conference. It's called CBTC World Summit 2023, and it's happening on the 20th and the 21st of September. There will be 3 sessions of about 6 hours duration each for 3 different global regions, one for Asia Pacific, one's for North and South America, and one's for Europe and the Middle East. So wherever you are in the world, one of those sessions will be during the daytime in your time zone, and you can watch it live for the full 6 hours with 6 presentations. The kicker about this is that all other presentations, including the ones from your own session, will be available for replay via recordings. So that means that if the other session should be in the middle of your night, you can still watch it on demand at a time that's more convenient for you and doesn't interfere with your good night's sleep. The conference is available for registration right now at my training portal under docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I repeat that, docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. I'm putting a lot of effort into this conference. It will be an absolute blockbuster event, and I very much hope to see you there. The second highlights are from episode number 15 with Lena Harnisch from Braunschweig in Germany. Lena is an expert in the field of cybersecurity, and accordingly, I picked highlights which are educational on that topic, starting with an explanation of what cybersecurity means, then talking about some cautionary measures to basically have a first line of defense against accidental, almost cyber attacks, then a more sophisticated protection against professional hackers, a short explanation, but very profound short explanation, what a demilitarized zone is, a DMZ. And then lastly, some tips what an individual can do at home to get a reasonable level of protection against cyber attacks. What is cybersecurity in your own words?
To answer that question, we need to look at terminology first. So there are a lot of different words that are being used when we talk about cybersecurity. There's information security, IT security, cybersecurity, OT security, and so on and so on and so on. So if you Google the definitions, it can get a little bit confusing. And if you have different languages, like in German, for example, the word is used for both safety and security. It gets even more confusing. So just to start, we need to look at what it actually means in the application sense. So we have, if we just say cybersecurity in a general term, we have cybersecurity in terms that relate to your daily work, your emails, phishing attempts, your password security, and so on. And then cybersecurity for the actual application for our signaling systems and communication systems. So in the past, where we had signaling systems in a closed environment, without any interface to the outside world, it wasn't that much of an importance, but now everything is interconnected, everything is more digitalized, and we have lots more interfaces to the outside world, the bad outside world, and we need to secure the system. So that's where me and my team come in place for making sure that we have the correct products, the correct design, the correct processes, the testing, and everything in place to make it secure. And secure against who? Against hackers, against malicious entities. There are different levels of type of attackers that we need to consider. But also sometimes that we don't think about is like the accidental attack. So someone who actually doesn't mean to do anything, bad, just who's curious, who wants to like see what happens if I, log in here, if I do this, things like that to also protect against.
What are some basic cautionary measures to increase the level of cybersecurity?
What we currently do is a lot of awareness training. So we require to have all employees, but especially project staff and also maintainers, the operators, everybody, we give them trainings. So web-based trainings that they can do just to be reminded of what not to do, or just to be cautious, use common sense, and to make sure that just each little step contributes to the big picture. So you have, like you said, don't write down passwords, change your passwords regularly, don't share passwords, use secure passwords, use encrypted emails, make sure you only send information on a need-to-know basis, don't use ChatGPT for business purposes, don't share things on social media, like you said, USB sticks, don't let any loose hard drives or SSDs lying around in the office. You can even lock your laptop to your desk. There's these laptop locks you can use. For business travel, to use privacy screens on your screen, and bunch of very simple but effective measures you can use for your day-to-day work. And actually, a lot of them are also transferable to the operational use in your project, in your railway project. So there again, passwords is a big topic. You need to make sure that default passwords are changed, that you use secure passwords, but also make sure that they're not usable or not too complicated for an actual tester or commissioner to enter them 100 times a day. And if you need to share the passwords, same as is in your day-to-day life, to use approved tools. So there are certain password management tools that you can use to securely share them from like your development team to your commissioning team.
How can you protect against professional hackers?
So it's a very methodical approach, just to make sure that we've done our due diligence and implemented everything we can to make the system secure. So first you start with the dry topics, to look at the standards which are relevant in your country that you're implementing your railway system, because each country possibly has their own sets of standards in addition to the international ones. So the big ones here are the 62443, relevant for IT security, and the newest ones was specifically for railway applications at the TS 5007. So that one actually defines railway assets and classifies them into groups of criticality, security levels, defines zones and conduits in the system. So that one's an interesting one to look at. And one aspect it also mentions is the defense in depth approach. And that's essentially what we look at when we implement measures to defend the system. So we look at all these different layers from the outside to the inside of measures to secure it. So you can start with your simple things, your standards, your procedures, your trainings. You can do physical security on the outside to make sure everything is locked, only authorized people have access. And then you look at the more techie solutions like firewalls, antivirus, as you said earlier, a demilitarized zone between our actual citizen system and the outside world, which is very important. And other measures going further into the system. So secure coding, secure passwords, network segmentation. So it's a lot of looking at the different layers. This defense in depth approach is also called the onion model because it actually has layers. And then going step by step, documenting everything. One big part is the threat and risk analysis. That actually is not only a tool for starting this whole process because you define your assets, you define the risk, and you look at what kind of measures you need to implement, which ones you can implement, because sometimes there's a limit to what you're permitted to do without affecting the system, without affecting the operability. And then also in the long term, something that's very important is vulnerability monitoring. So if you have your system set up, you have your software installed, it's the same as your computer at home. It's only as good as it is in the moment. So if you don't touch it for a year without doing any updates, without doing any virus checks and checking for updates, it might be out of date and therefore present vulnerability to the system. So you need to make sure it's up to date. You need to check for any open source vulnerabilities that are monitored worldwide and then implement patches and update it.
What is a demilitarized zone?
Essentially, it's like a border control. So if you have your internal system with your railway applications and your external systems, your interfaces that go to the outside. So if you have your customer-facing information system, your SCADA, your master clock, or any other external interfaces, the demilitarized zone essentially consists of firewalls, specific configurations that prohibit any unwanted data coming from the outside to the inside, and the same preventing any sensitive information coming from the inside to the outside. So it's a very state of the art, defined by standards. Even the BSI in Germany defines demilitarized zones for any critical infrastructure. So there again, you have also the applicability to railway because it's critical infrastructure.
What can you do as an individual at home to have a reasonable protection against cyber attacks?
I think the best response is to look at what is reasonable. So obviously you can invest a lot of money even on your personal laptop at home to have all the fancy software, the fancy settings and VPNs and whatnot to make it as secure as possible. Yes. However, I think for the average user who only uses your home laptop for online banking, social media and email, it's probably a little bit overkill. So there again, common sense, I guess, is the best approach. Just to keep if you're using Windows, to keep your Windows updated, use your Windows Defender, and then check if the antivirus updates or the internal checks for the antivirus are done on a regular basis. If you're receiving emails, just be smart and not click on any links, especially if it starts with "you've won." Just again, common sense. Passwords again for your emails and for your bank accounts, just to use different passwords, secure passwords, change them regularly. I think for your personal life, those are the measures that you can do and easily do to reduce the risk of hacking, hijacking, whatever. But I mean, you can if you have, like, if you're self-employed and you're using your personal laptop for also your business topics, then it might be worthwhile having actually a professional look at it and implementing some other measures. That's something that would be useful, I guess, in that case. And obviously for me as a regular employee, I have my personal stuff at home and I have my work laptop. Work laptop is managed by a central IT system. It's regularly updated.
Hi, this is Doc Frank. Let me jump in here right now to tell you about a new training which is called High Capacity Signaling Blueprint. This is a very unique all-in-one training that gives you everything you need to know about high capacity signaling. The foundations where you can compare what conventional signaling is to what high capacity signaling is with all the necessary definitions. Then we look at CBTC, communications-based train control, as the prime technology for high capacity signaling and how this is done. In the third part of the training, we look at varieties of the European Train Control System, ETCS, another global train control technology, and how this can be used to achieve high-capacity signaling. And then at the end of the training comes an actual blueprint how to apply CBTC or ETCS to get a real high-capacity outcome for your railway. It's basically 3 training courses in one. And as usual for my trainings, there is a study group available for joint learning with other people taking the same training. And after the training, you will get into an alumni community, which is exclusive for my training students, where you can ask questions and get them answered by myself on an ongoing basis for a guaranteed minimum of 12 months. You can sign up on my usual training platform, which is docfranktraining.podia.com/HCS Blueprint. I said it again, docfranktraining.podia.com/HCS Blueprint, with HCS being the acronym for High Capacity Signaling. If it's important for you to learn about the latest trend in railway signaling, which is high capacity signaling, then this is the training for you. The third and last highlight reel is from my episode number 25 with Lauren Guiney from Melbourne. It starts off with Lauren talking about the safety on railways, especially from a female perspective. The second highlight is her experience with safety, especially on the Metropolitan Rail Network in Melbourne, where she lives. And then the last one is her experience from overseas railways that she gained from trips to Europe and to Japan. I hope you enjoy. How did you come to talk about female safety on railways?
Pretty much started out with seeing that there were scholarships available for core and thought I'd just give it a go. I've never been to a conference before, so thought that could be a great place to start. And the application process was to pitch an idea for how the railway industry can be improved in the next 25 years. So it was the 25th year anniversary of RTSA, who hosted core. So they were thinking 25 years into the future, what more can we do? And so when I was thinking about that topic, I didn't have anything necessarily from work that sprung to mind in terms of improvements for the next 25 years. But I thought more about when I'm traveling on transport, how could I see that being improved? What key factors are there for me in, I guess, barriers to using trains and our public transport network here in Melbourne? So when thinking about that, I thought about the fact that, I dedicate so much of my work life to our railway network. And after a certain time of night here in Melbourne, it gets dark pretty early. Once it's dark, I don't really feel comfortable taking the train anymore. And this is an issue that is definitely felt by a lot of women. A lot of people that I speak to have this same concern. So when I was thinking about how it could be improved, that was the main thing that sprung to my mind. So put in my application for that under that topic, and was successful in getting shortlisted to the top 3 nominations, which gave me the opportunity to speak at core, which was really exciting to be at my first conference and to speak at my first conference. So I got to give a 5-minute presentation at the beginning of Wednesday, and it went really, really well and was really well received by everyone, which was really fantastic to see that the industry is excited about pushing this safety for women in rail.
What are your own experiences with safety on the Melbourne Rail Network?
There is a lot being done in Melbourne at the moment. We also have protective service officers at 216 of our stations once it gets dark, so after 6 p.m, I think. And that is a real security blanket for me personally when I'm traveling on trains. I guess the only limitation of that is that they are only at stations and only at select stations. And incidents do happen during the day as well, but it's definitely very reassuring at night, which is probably when most people feel unsafe. In my presentation, I also talked about some ways that we can improve safety from a design aspect as well, rather than just in the operation. So obviously that police presence is very important in an operational sense. But if we then look at the design as well, there's a lot that can be done in terms of making sure that we have open spaces. A lot of it is those feelings of isolation, and it's certainly something I feel here in Melbourne. I particularly noticed when I went overseas and I was traveling, I used the tube in London, and it was 9 o'clock at night. It was pitch black. It was November at the time, and there were so many people around, and I didn't get that same sense of fear because there were lots of people around me, and I guess it's just that safety in numbers a bit as well. So here in Melbourne, you travel past maybe 7 p.m. and it's very desolate. There's not many people around, especially once you're a couple of stops out from the CBD. And so there's a lot that can be done in making sure we have those open spaces so people can always be seeing you, making sure we have enough lighting. Lighting is a big one that makes people feel very comfortable if there's enough lighting. And also just having things around the station to make it more of a destination rather than just, a transitory space, a place that we just pass through on the train. If you have more shops around, if you provide maybe some sports facilities, there tends to be more people that are just hanging about the area, and that it makes you feel a lot better and deters a lot of criminals as well.
What have been your experiences on railways during your trips in Europe and Japan?
I had some interesting experiences while I was away with trains, some good, some bad. One of the bad ones was I was taking the train from Edinburgh to London, and there was a whole lot of delays. It was terrible weather, and as we were passing by at probably 20 kilometers per hour on the train, you could see the tracks on the other side were completely flooded and there was just water spurting out. It was crazy. So that was a bit of a lesson in maybe what not to do. And I did unfortunately catch a few strikes as well while I was in Europe. So the tube was on strike and I was meant to get a train across Austria, which also was on strike. So I had to bus instead, unfortunately. So, but in terms of the networks there, it is just so much easier to get around, and it is so well connected by trains. And trains were my opted choice of transport when there was no strikes. And I just thought that was absolutely fantastic. Its systems were so easy to use. I think something that's very different to here in Melbourne, which is something we're somewhat trying to fix, is the connectedness of lines. So here in Melbourne, we've got a radial system where if you're out in this part of the city, you can't get to that part of town without going through here and meeting in here. So I think that connectedness, especially across the tube, was fantastic. And then after that, I actually went to Japan as well and got to see a super efficient transport system, no strikes at all, and just crazy sizes of stations there, like stations with 100 different exits. So I got to see a whole range. Probably the bits that ended up standing out to me were the architectural aspects. I was really excited to go to Budapest and see my favourite station there, which I'd studied back here in Melbourne. And I dragged my friend along. Yes. I dragged my friend along to this specific station. She said, "Really? Are we going to see a train station on holiday?" And I said, "Yes, I really need to see this train station." And it was everything I expected. It was beautiful.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share, and until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.